I came upon the most hideous and monstrous entity I had ever encountered in any haunted house. That was his actual words to me.
Now, this next slide would be probably, I'm assuming, the communication that you had?
Yes. Now, that was very, very dangerous thing to do, to communicate in a home like that. And Tony, when I tell you about that man from Duke University and Mary Pasquarella, it was during that communication that they were so hideously affected. Actually leaving the house, they were so badly affected.
Now, there were tests, I understand, done on George Lutz?
Oh, yes.
And Kathy
George Lutz had 3 lie detector tests, and so did his wife, Kathy, and they passed every one. And the man you see in the background there is Mr. Chris Gugas, who was president of the Polygraph Association of America. He said to me, you know, Ed, after these people passed those tests, he said, it was so frightening what they told me that I started wearing a crucifix again that I had worn during the Second World War when I was in combat. That's how bad it was. And then you see Kathy here, she's being tested, and they had voice stress tests taken also, which they passed. They passed all these tests in recounting their experiences in these homes. You know, Lorraine and I have been in hundreds and hundreds of haunted houses, and we've interviewed numerous people all over the world. I watch people, I look at them, I watch their body movements. I know what they should say, I know how they should answer me when I ask them a question.
Right.
These people were right on. There was no hesitation. The phenomena that they described to us was the type of thing that happens in this house.
So you could say then unequivocally that George and Kathy were not lying, that it was not a hoax.
Not lying, no,
they were not lying at all,
now,
Tony.
Did this phenomena just happen in Amityville, or were you guys at all affected? Because
Followed us home.
Oh, yes.
I understand that you were affected a little bit.
Never forget the night.
What's this picture here?
Yeah,
This is
it's
a
the night
doorway
that we
from
came home,
the
yes.
main part of our house going into a passageway that leads into what is now an occult museum. But you go through the passageway and you come into the occult museum, and then my office is at the end of that room. Now, it was after 3 o'clock, and I heard this door open up. Now, I'm quite a ways. I'm a good 60, 70 feet away in another building, but I could hear that door open up. And I could hear footsteps coming up the passageway. Now, it's carpeted, so I shouldn't hear footsteps. But I thought to myself, Lorraine is coming down to bring me a cup of coffee, and yet I know that she does not want to go down into that area after 9 o'clock at night because of the numerous phenomena that occur. Now, here I am looking out of my office into that darkened area of the museum.
Okay.
The doorway is just to the right of where you see a mirror way back there.
Yeah.
I could hear what I can describe as a swirling wind. And it came into the doorway, and I could see a dark mass, or what we call a shadow ghost. I immediately recognized it for what it was because of the stench that accompanied it, which was very foul.
Right.
The icy coldness. I stepped into the doorway here, and I held up a crucifix, and it came up to me within about 5 feet. I commanded it in the name of Jesus Christ to leave and go back to where it came from. It backed off a little bit, came around the room, and came at me again. I then took holy water, and I sprinkled it on it, and it backed off again. Now, people think that we don't become frightened in these situations. Well, we do.
Right.
We're made of blood and flesh just like they are. I immediately went toward the back door. I went out of the house, out of the building, I should say, and toward my house.
No,
Now, to the left there, where you see the rain pipe, that's the building I was in. I left
that small
there,
building there on the left?
That's on the left, right.
Okay.
I went over toward the
Main part of the
main
house.
part of the house, but when I got near the porch, I could hear animals fighting. I flashed my light there, and there was nothing there. Now, that was meant to frighten me, as the shadow ghost was, because when a person becomes frightened, they throw off psychic energy into the atmosphere, which an evil spirit can use as fuel to manifest even more phenomena.
Now, let me ask you a question. Was what was in that house evil?
It positively was evil. There's no two ways about it.
Oh, yes.
It's about as evil as a house can get. There's nobody out there looking at this program right now, listening to us, that can prove that the diabolical devils, demons, evil spirits don't exist. But we can prove it, and we have proven it many times. How? Evidence. If you ask us for our evidence, we ask you for your evidence. We can prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that haunted houses, ghosts, devils, demons do exist, simply because we have the evidence.
Right. I understand also, Lorraine and Ed, that even years, I believe, after
Yes.
the Amityville case that you went on, you had an incident in Pennsylvania?
Yes, we did.
Can you tell us about that?
In a car that we had, a brand new car, Tony. It was a bright, sunny day. It was cold weather, but it was a bright, sunny day. And we were going eastbound on 84, and we came to an area that said the Promised Land. And Ed commented, and he said something about, boy, the Promised Land, a good place. Now, Ed wore a miraculous medal to the Mother of God on a silver chain. But that particular morning in our hotel room, it was badly knotted. So I just picked it up and put it in my pocketbook. So at this point, Tony, I took it on my lap and undoing all the knots. I put it over Ed's head and down into his shirt. And at that point, the next sign was the Lord's Valley. And at that point, Ed said, even the Amityville horror couldn't get us here. See, even years later, you can still give recognition.
Okay.
It was a sunny morning. No ice, no rain on the road. Tractor-trailer truck was about 50 yards behind us.
He was
that
one
car
witness.
started to sway back and forth. The only way I can describe it is as 4 banana peels for tires on an oily road. It started to spin. There was no way that I could stop that car from spinning in circles. It went up into the air. We went over the guardrail, down a 40-foot embankment backwards. All this time, I was praying to the Blessed Mother.
Right out loud, Tony.
Right out loud, and I said, help us, save us. And that car, I felt, was going to hit the gas tank at the bottom, and it was going to burst into flames. The car turned over. I had a heck of a job getting Lorraine out because it was a two-door car, and I had to push her out. I got out, but by that time, there was already a state trooper who had been on the other side of the highway and had heard a truck driver 50 yards in back of us describing what was happening. And they yelled down to us, is there anybody else in that car?
No,
and we
so
said,
anybody
no.
alive in that car?
We went up the embankment. Now, you're not going to believe this. We went up the embankment. That car went down, turned over, and I was thinking to myself, miraculously, we were saved, and we were. How are we going to get home? A train? Was I going to rent a car? The record came out, pulled our car up. There was not one scratch on that car. Not one scratch. And remember, it went over a guardrail, down a 40-foot embankment backwards, and turned over.
That was almost like a miracle in itself.
It was a miracle in itself, Tony, and I think it had a great deal to do with the intercession of our faith at that time.
Which proves one thing, Tony, that God is more powerful than any devil.
Now, can you kind of sum up for us, Lorraine or Ed,
Yeah.
about George and Kathy now today, or since the horror and they left and after
Well,
they fled?
It's taken its toll on this family. They are divorced. They are living apart from each other. Today there are 5 children involved, pretty grown up at this point. But they still communicate, probably for the sake of the children, but it certainly took its toll. But I have to say that of all the cases that I ever worked on, that case affected our personal lives more than any case we ever worked on.
Anybody that went into that home in Amityville and said that it was a hoax was never in that house.
No.
They never went in that house. They never talked with the Latzes. They never met any of the central figures in the case itself. They never talked with Father Pecoraro, ourselves, the investigators. There's one thing that I can say about the Amityville case, that, again, on a scale of 1 to 10, that could be a 12. And I would never want to go into another house like that.
And it was a reality.
Joe, one thing I'd like to clear up if I could. People say that George and Kathy Lutz became millionaires. Is that true?
No. George and Kathy Lutz
God, no.
made very little money. Any money that they made was taken by lawsuits by these crazies that were instigating all of these here hoax stories against them, thinking they could get money. The only people that made money on that case was Jay Anson, who wrote the book. He had never written a book before on the supernatural. He would have written it a lot different than he did. When he came to our house, I tried to explain to him that he had to describe the phenomena in terms of psychic research rather than to the layman saying the banister exploded before their very eyes. Well, anybody knows that when they went in there, the banister didn't explode, but it did through telepathic hypnosis. And that's what he should have said. You know, he was on the last chapter of that book, and he had a heart attack, which he recovered from, thank God. And when he recovered, he finished the book. He then sent the manuscript to a woman in New York City to type up for him. The man who was bringing the manuscript was at a red light. Suddenly, the car felt as though it was going into a hole. He looked out, and the car was sinking into the road. He jumped out, and the next morning, they pulled that car out of a 15-foot hole. Everything was soaking wet except the manuscript, which was then given to that woman to retype. And the night that she finished it, there was a fire in her house, and she and her son just about escaped. Jay Anson had never written a book before. That was the first book, The Amityville Horror. He tried for a second book, 666, which of course means the devil. On the last chapter, he had a heart attack and he died.
Unbelievable story. So you would consider the Amityville Horror one of your worst cases ever?
Positively.
Definitely. It is one
I don't
of our
think there's any
worst.
place that you could go in our civilized world and somebody hasn't heard of the Amityville Horror.
Right.
The only ones that try to say that it's a hoax are the atheists, people who have an axe to grind, but people who understand the area of demonology and theology know that there are many Amityville horrors out there and that people have investigated them and will continue to investigate such cases for many, many years to come.
Again, if someone has a problem, I'd like to always end the show with this if I could, because there are people I know from experience that have many, many problems, many people out there. How can they contact the famous Ghostbusters, Ed and Lorraine Warren?
They can write to us, Tony, at our post office box, which is Post Office Box 41 in Monroe, Connecticut, 06468.
If you feel that you're living in a haunted house, don't hesitate to call us.
No.
We will be glad to come out and see what's going on. If you have any problems that you think are supernatural or preternatural, call us, write us a letter, and we'll try to help you out.
Also, Tony, if there's questions they have,
They could write you a letter.
Yes.
They could write you a letter, right, and explain what's happening.
Exactly.
We'll be glad to answer those letters.
Be happy to.
Very good. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is Amityville Parts 1 and 2. Hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, for Lorraine Warren, for Ed Warren, I'm Tony Spera. Good night.